I never thought I'd find myself in a house like this. Old, weathered, and too large for one person. It stood at the end of a narrow, tree-lined road, surrounded on three sides by dense pine forest. The realtor had called it charming and secluded, but those were just polite ways of saying forgotten. It had been abandoned for years, its last occupants gone without much explanation. When I pulled into the overgrown driveway that afternoon, the place loomed above me, its upper windows like dark, sightless eyes. My stomach knotted, but I told myself it was just a long drive and my overactive imagination. I'd taken the lease because I needed distance. From people, from noise, from the choking pace of the city. Inside, the house smelled faintly of mildew, old wood, and something sharp I couldn't quite name. Dust sheets still covered the furniture. Each room echoed when I spoke aloud to myself, a habit I'd picked up when I was alone for too long. My voice didn't feel welcome here. The first night, I didn't bother unpacking much. I chose the bedroom on the second floor, the one with the wide window that overlooked the yard. It was enormous, framed in warped wood. The glass rippled slightly, distorting the outside world like it was seen through water. I remember thinking the window must have been original to the house, maybe 100 years old. I tried to settle in, making tea, arranging a lamp by the bed, even reading for a while. But as soon as dusk fell, I noticed it. The silence. It wasn't like the city, where silence was just the absence of traffic. This silence had weight, a density that pressed against my ears. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Even the crickets outside stopped their song. That's when I first looked up at the window, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something. A shadow. It was outside, by the edge of the tree line, low to the ground but upright somehow, angled toward the house. I blinked, pressed my forehead to the glass, trying to cut through the distortion. But by then, the shadow was gone. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a deer, maybe just the movement of branches. My nerves were strung too tight from the move. Still, I drew the curtains closed before going to bed. The next morning, I woke to pale sunlight dripping into the room. The curtains had been pulled apart. I froze in bed, staring at the parted fabric, my chest tightening. I knew I had closed them. I could see my own hand doing it, sliding the heavy cloth across the rod until the world was shut out. Yet here they were, spread wide, letting the warped glass glow with daylight. I sat up, heartbeat pounding in my throat, telling myself I must have been mistaken. Or maybe the rod had bent, causing them to slide apart on their own. It was an old house. Things shifted, warped, moved, but I couldn't shake the thought that someone had stood at the window last night. Someone had looked in. The day passed uneventfully, though I found myself checking every window in the house, rattling the locks. They were all stiff with age, but secure. I spent hours unpacking, trying to fill the hollow rooms with the comfort of familiarity. By the time night came, I was exhausted. Still, as I climbed into bed, I left the lamp on, just in case. Sleep was thin, fragile. At some hour I couldn't place. I woke with a distinct sensation of being watched. My body locked stiff, and I forced myself not to move, just to breathe quietly. The air was cold against my face. Too cold. I turned my head slightly, and there it was, through the rippled pane of the glass. Something stood outside. It wasn't a shadow this time. Its shape was wrong. Long. Too long. Its body crooked, like a figure stretched in unnatural ways. I couldn't see its face, not clearly, but I felt its focus on me, sharp and heavy, like a hand pressing into my chest. I wanted to scream, but the sound clamped in my throat. My fingers dug into the sheets, slick with sweat. I blinked once, twice, and when I opened my eyes, the thing was gone. The yard outside was empty again, but the curtains, once more, were open wide. By morning, I had convinced myself it had been a dream. Exhaustion, nerves, the lingering unease of being alone in a place so strange. I tried to laugh at myself, though my laugh came out brittle and hollow. I made coffee in the ancient kitchen, listening to the groan of pipes and the faint ticking of the clock above the doorway. The whole time, I felt wrong. Like the air around me had shifted, charged with something unseen. When I went outside to breathe fresh air, I noticed something in the dirt beneath the window. Footprints. Not boots, not shoes, not bare feet either. They were elongated impressions, deep in the soil, trailing from the trees to the wall of the house, right to where I slept, and then back again. I stood frozen on the lawn, staring at the prints. The longer I looked, the stranger they seemed. They weren't human, and they weren't animal either. Too long, with a narrowing at one end that reminded me of fingers or claws dragging. The earth around them was disturbed, as if something had lingered, pacing, pressing its weight into the soil. I crouched, close enough to trace the edge of one with my finger. The dirt crumbled at my touch, dry, despite the morning dew. My stomach knotted, and I stood quickly, brushing my hands against my jeans, telling myself it had to be a trick of erosion. Or maybe roots had lifted the ground in strange patterns. Anything but what it really looked like. I forced myself back inside, but the house no longer felt protective. Every floorboard groaned like it was whispering secrets. Every draft through the windows chilled me like breath on the back of my neck. That night, I pushed the curtains tight and shoved a chair under the knob of my bedroom door. I left the lamp burning. It felt childish, but the thought of darkness terrified me. Sleep didn't come easy. My mind replayed the sight of those prints, looping endlessly, each pass deepening the dread. When my eyes finally closed, I dreamed of warped glass, stretching, bending, bulging inward, as if something pressed its face against it, trying to come through. I woke to a faint sound, scratching. At first I thought it was in the walls, maybe mice. But as I listened, holding my breath, I realized it was coming from the window itself. A deliberate, dragging scratch against the glass. Long, slow, again. I sat up, pulse hammering, and looked toward the window. The curtains were open, the lamp's glow reflected off the warped pane, but beneath the reflection, I swore I saw movement, something shifting just beyond the glass. My throat tightened. The scratching stopped. And then came the tapping. 3 slow taps, spaced evenly, like knuckles rapping politely against the window. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt crushed, panic building so violently it made me dizzy. My body wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I just sat there, trembling, staring. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. After what felt like hours, I forced myself to move. I scrambled from bed, grabbed the lamp, and shoved the curtains closed with shaking hands. The moment the fabric slid across the glass, the house felt lighter, as though whatever had been outside stepped back. I left the lamp on until dawn. In daylight, the window looked ordinary again, if old and warped. But when I leaned close, I saw them. Lines etched faintly into the glass. Scratches, 4, maybe 5, clustered near the center of the pane, as if something had indeed dragged claws across it. I pressed my palm against the marks, the cold glass leaching into my skin. They weren't deep, but they were real. That was the first morning I cried. I didn't even realize I was doing it at first. Just tears spilling down my cheeks as I backed away from the window, hands trembling. It wasn't the scratches themselves, but what they confirmed. Something had been there. Something real enough to leave marks. I tried to call someone that day. Anyone. My phone had no signal. The bars flickered and died no matter where I stood in the house or the yard. Even the landline on the kitchen wall was dead, its cord tangled like a snake at my feet. I thought about leaving, packing the car and abandoning the lease. But some stubborn part of me resisted. I'd come here to escape, to prove I could handle solitude. Leaving after just 2 nights felt like failure. Besides, I told myself, maybe the house was just playing tricks. Old wood shifted, glass warped, animals left strange prints. My mind was making monsters out of nothing, so I stayed. But when night fell again, I couldn't shake the dread. I set a chair against the window this time, pressing its back tight to the glass as if it could somehow block the thing outside. I turned off the lamp, thinking maybe darkness would make me less visible, less of a target. Then I lay under the covers, eyes wide, waiting. Hours passed. Silence. And then, a soft thud. It came from the window, the vibration faintly trembling through the floor. Then another, louder. A third, harder still, rattling the glass. I bolted upright, clutching the sheets, heart pounding so loud it drowned everything else. The chair scraped, as if something was pushing from outside, trying to shove it inward. I whispered to myself, nonsense words, pleas, prayers. My breath came fast, ragged. The sound stopped. But in the silence that followed, I heard it. A low, wet exhale, right against the glass. I couldn't see it, not through the curtains, but I knew. Something stood there, inches away, its breath fogging the window between us. And it was waiting. Morning came like a reprieve from hell. When the light spilled in, I gathered the courage to pull the curtains aside. The chair had been nudged an inch off its spot. Not much, but enough to know I hadn't imagined it. On the glass, a smear of condensation marked the height of my face. A perfect oval, as if something had pressed its mouth or nose against the pane. And just above it, etched faintly into the warped glass, was a single word. Open. I couldn't stop staring at the word. The letters were crude, jagged, uneven, as though etched by something that didn't quite understand how to write. Yet the meaning was undeniable. Open. I backed away from the window slowly, my legs trembling so badly I nearly tripped over the bed frame. My mouth was dry, my pulse thundering in my ears. There was no explaining this away. Scratches might have been an animal. The footprints, too. But this was deliberate. Someone, or something, was trying to get inside. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. No matter where I went in the house, I felt eyes on me. I avoided the windows, though the warped glass still caught my reflection in strange, stretched distortions. It was almost worse than seeing outside. Sometimes I thought my reflection moved a beat too late, or lingered when I turned away. I busied myself with cleaning, with noise, with anything that could drown out the oppressive silence. I scrubbed counters until my fingers ached, polished the tarnished brass handles of cabinets, ran water just to hear something alive. But the house swallowed every sound, muffling them until I felt I was trapped in an endless echo chamber. When night came, dread filled me like lead. I told myself I wouldn't go into the bedroom, but as the shadows lengthened and the forest outside grew black, the rest of the house felt worse. I ended up in the same place, staring at the same window. This time, I shoved the dresser against it, piling books on top for good measure. My barricade felt flimsy, but it gave me a thread of comfort. I crawled into bed, curling tight, praying that the thing outside wouldn't return. For a while, the night was still. I even began to hope I'd imagined it all, that sleep deprivation and fear had twisted the ordinary into nightmares. But then I heard it. Not at the window this time. From the woods, a slow, rhythmic sound, like branches cracking under heavy weight. Step by step, something moved among the trees, each snap and crunch deliberate, impossibly slow. I clutched the blankets to my chest, holding my breath. The sound drew closer. The crickets had stopped again. The entire forest was silent except for those heavy, deliberate steps. I tried to convince myself it was a deer, maybe even a bear, but deep down I knew better. The weight of each movement carried intent. When it reached the edge of the yard, the sound stopped. And then, a low whistle, just a single note, drawn out, wavering. Not a bird, not the wind, something imitating, testing. It lasted only a few seconds, but the sound carved itself into my chest. I pulled the covers over my head, as though a blanket could shield me. My breaths were loud inside the cocoon, and I pressed a hand against my mouth to stifle the sob that clawed its way up my throat. Minutes passed, maybe hours. When I finally dared to peek out, the room was unchanged, silent, still. But when I looked at the window, my stomach dropped. Through the faint seam where the dresser didn't quite meet the wall, a thin crack of warped glass showed. And in that sliver, I saw movement. Something shifted just beyond the glass, tall and crooked, its form leaning at an unnatural angle, head tilted too far to one side. I shut my eyes, trembling, whispering to myself until exhaustion dragged me under. Morning arrived with pale gray light. I shoved the dresser aside with stiff, shaking arms. The glass bore no new words, but the condensation had returned. Another oval, larger this time, fogged the center of the pane. I stumbled outside, desperate to prove to myself there was nothing there. But the prints were back. They circled the house now, dozens of them pressed deep into the earth. Not just coming and going, but pacing, lingering, weaving around the foundation, like the thing had walked the perimeter again and again all night. And at the tree line, I noticed something new. A shape. Not a person. Not an animal. Something in between. It stood too still, too tall. Its limbs elongated. Its outline was jagged, as though its body was made of crooked branches and broken angles. For a heartbeat, I swore I saw its head turn, directly toward me. I stumbled back, choking on air, and when I looked again, it was gone. The trees swayed gently, innocent, as if nothing had ever been there. I didn't go back inside right away. My hands were shaking too badly to hold the doorknob. I stood in the yard, trying to breathe, trying not to scream. That's when I heard it again. The whistle. But this time, it came from the other side of the house, as if the thing was circling, watching, waiting. By the fourth night, the house felt less like a refuge and more like a trap. Every creak in the floorboards, every faint groan of the beams above made me flinch. I tried to tell myself the thing outside couldn't come in, not with the locks, not with the barricades. But each night the boundaries seemed thinner, the glass weaker, the walls less protective. That evening, I carried a chair into the hallway and sat there with a flashlight clutched tight in my hand. I couldn't bear to be in the bedroom again, not with that window staring down at me. The hallway was narrow, lined with faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges, but at least it had no direct view outside. I sat awake for hours, listening. At first nothing, just silence thick as wool. But eventually, faint sounds bled in. The whistle again, drawn out, low, circling the house like a predator pacing its cage. Every time it stopped, I counted the seconds, my pulse racing, until it began again from a different side. It wasn't random. It was searching. Then came another sound, lighter, closer. A skittering, faint but deliberate, like something dragging nails along wood. At first I thought it was coming from the hallway wall, but the longer I listened, the more certain I became. It was inside. I pressed my ear to the wallpaper, heart hammering so loud I thought it would drown everything else out. The sound was faint but steady, scratching, shifting, a faint rasp like something crawling between the walls. I stumbled back, gripping the flashlight so hard my knuckles hurt. My mind screamed rats, but I knew better. Rats didn't whistle. Rats didn't write words on glass. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I tore into the walls. I dragged a chair over, pulled at the brittle wallpaper until it ripped in long, curling sheets. Behind it was plaster, cracked and crumbling. I hammered with the heel of my flashlight, punching a jagged hole until dust clouded the air. The inside was dark, choked with insulation and wood beams. I shoved the flashlight through the gap, my hand trembling as I angled it. Something shifted, not far, just a few feet inside the cavity. A flicker of movement, too large to be a rat. My breath caught as the light swept over a section of insulation that bulged outward, sagging as if something pressed against it from the other side. I staggered back, choking on plaster dust, my chest tight. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. The bulge pulsed once, then went still. I left the wall open, afraid to touch it again. The hole stared at me all day like a wound, the blackness inside swallowing the beam of my flashlight when I dared to shine it. That night, I tried sleeping in the living room downstairs. I barricaded the front and back doors with furniture, leaving myself only a narrow path to the hallway if I needed to run. I curled on the couch, wrapped in every blanket I could find. But the moment I closed my eyes, the scratching returned. Not from upstairs this time, from directly behind the couch. The wall vibrated faintly, the wood groaning under the pressure of something moving inside. My skin prickled. I turned slowly, flashlight shaking in my grip, and pressed the beam against the wall. The surface bulged outward, just for a moment, before snapping back. Something was in there, crawling between the walls like an insect in a hive. I leapt off the couch, panic tearing through me, and fled back to the hallway. My lungs burned, my throat raw from shallow breaths. I pressed my back to the plaster, the irony bitter, hiding against the very walls that held it. And then, from above me, a knock. Not on the door, not on the windows, from the ceiling. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. By dawn, I was delirious with exhaustion. I staggered outside, desperate for air, and looked around the yard. The footprints were everywhere now, not just circling, but weaving erratic paths across the grass, crisscrossing like the yard had become a map of its pacing. The soil was churned and raw, each elongated print pressed deep. But the worst part wasn't the prints, it was the trees. On the bark of the nearest pine, long claw marks raked downward, fresh and jagged, and higher up, far higher than any person could reach, was another word scratched into the wood. Soon. I don't remember going back inside. All I remember is locking every door, closing every curtain, piling furniture against every weak point. The house became a fortress of desperation. I moved from room to room, clutching the flashlight, whispering to myself that it couldn't get in. It couldn't get in. But by nightfall, the whistling returned, closer, louder, and then, from the walls around me, faint at first, then clearer, unmistakable, the same whistle. But now it came from inside. I don't know how long I sat in the corner of the hallway, flashlight clenched in my hand like a weapon. My back was pressed to the wall, every nerve in my body raw, waiting for the whistle to stop. But it didn't stop. It grew louder. It echoed through the beams, the pipes, the floorboards. The house itself seemed to carry it, like the walls had become lungs. Each drawn-out note stretched longer than the last, quivering with a strange, mocking tone. And then, as if it had decided I'd heard enough, and it went silent. The quiet was worse. I crept into the bedroom again, against every instinct. I don't know why. Maybe because part of me still wanted to confront the window, to prove that I wasn't losing my mind. The barricade I'd built, the dresser, the books, the chair, still stood in place, looming like a crooked guard against the glass. For a long while, nothing happened. Just silence pressing against my skull, the faint hum of my blood rushing in my ears, and then, knock. The sound came from the other side of the window. I froze, flashlight beam jerking against the wall. Knock, knock. 3 steady raps, deliberate and slow. The same cadence it had tapped the night before, only louder, closer. The glass shuddered with each knock. I felt tears spill hot down my cheeks. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs locked, trembling uselessly. My breath came shallow, ragged. The knocks stopped. And then, a smear of condensation spread across the warped pane, right at eye level. The oval shape of breath, fogging the glass. But this time, it didn't just leave a mark. It lingered. For a few seconds, I watched the condensation grow, as though something pressed its mouth against the window, exhaling slowly, endlessly. I backed away until my spine hit the opposite wall, the flashlight flickering as my hand shook. And through the fog, a shape appeared. A crooked outline, hunched and elongated, pressed against the glass. Its head tilted, its limbs too long, its body bent in angles that shouldn't exist. The warped glass distorted it further, twisting its features until my mind rebelled at trying to make sense of them. But I felt its gaze. Even through the glass, even without seeing its eyes clearly, I felt it. It was watching me, waiting. I don't know how long it stayed there. I only know that at some point, the condensation began to fade, and the crooked outline pulled back into the night. When I finally dared to breathe, I crawled into the hallway, dragging the flashlight with me, whispering broken promises to myself that I would leave at dawn. But dawn didn't come. Not really. When the light finally seeped through the warped windows, the house still felt heavy, wrong, like the night hadn't left at all. I staggered outside, desperate to prove the world still existed. And my heart sank. The prints were everywhere again, but this time they didn't just circle the house. They trailed to every window, every door, pressing so close the soil at the foundation would crush flat. It had tried them all. Every entrance. Every way in. I ran to the car. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice before jamming them into the ignition. I twisted, begging the engine to start. It didn't. Just a sick, sputtering cough. I tried again. Again. The same choking stutter. The gas gauge still sat above half. The battery light was off. Nothing made sense. But I didn't care why. I just knew I was trapped. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel, sobbing in frustration. The trees loomed tall and dark around the yard, silent witnesses to my panic. That's when I saw it. A figure standing between the trees. Crooked. Too tall, too thin. Its limbs hung at wrong angles. Its head cocked far to one side like it was listening. I blinked, and it was gone. just trees again, swaying gently in the breeze. I went back inside, locking the door behind me, though it felt meaningless. I slid to the floor, hugging my knees, my breath ragged, and then I heard it. Not outside this time. From upstairs. A slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap on the glass. I wanted to believe it was the wind, a branch, anything else. But deep down, I knew. The thing had returned to my bedroom window. I crept up the stairs, each step groaning beneath my weight, every nerve in my body screaming to stop. But I had to see. At the top of the stairs, the warped glass glowed faintly with daylight. The curtains were open again, though I hadn't touched them, and on the inside of the glass, scratches, fresh, jagged, curling across the pane in long arcs. Not outside, inside. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there, staring at the scratches carved across the inside of the glass. They curled downward like claws had dragged slowly, deliberately, savoring the act. That meant it had been in here. Not outside, not behind the warped window pane where I could pretend there was safety. Inside my room, inside my house. The realization hit me so hard I staggered backward, my knees buckling against the bed frame. My flashlight slipped from my hand and rolled across the floor, its beam slicing shadows against the wall. It had been inside, and I hadn't heard it. I spent the rest of the day in a kind of delirium, moving from room to room without direction. Every corner felt watched. Every creak in the floorboards made me spin, clutching my chest as if I could hold my heart inside. The hole in the hallway wall gaped wide, black and yawning, and I swore the insulation bulged again as I passed. I couldn't bring myself to cover it. Couldn't even look at it for more than a second. By afternoon, the air in the house had changed. It was thicker somehow, heavier, like the walls exhaled something foul. The smell reminded me of damp earth and rust, metallic and sour. I gagged, pressing my sleeve over my nose, but it clung no matter where I went. I wanted to leave. God, I wanted to leave. But the car still wouldn't start, and the road was miles of forest in either direction. The thought of walking out there alone, with that thing somewhere between the trees, was worse than staying inside. At least here, I had walls, thin walls, cracked walls, but walls. That night I lit every lamp I had, flooding the rooms with a sickly yellow glow. The shadows pulled back, but only barely. The scratching began again around midnight, first in the walls, then the ceiling, then directly beneath the floorboards where I sat in the living room, huddled in a nest of blankets. It was circling me, moving through the house unseen. I clutched the flashlight, its beam trembling across the furniture, though I knew it wouldn't matter. I couldn't shine light on something that lived in the dark. The scratching stopped, and then came the sound I dreaded most, the whistle. But this time, it wasn't muffled by glass or plaster. This time, it came from the same room I was in. I froze, tears spilling hot down my cheeks. My breath came too fast, too loud, and I pressed my hands over my mouth, trying to smother the sound. The whistle dragged long, shrill, mocking. Then it cut off suddenly, leaving silence so thick my ears rang. I turned slowly, flashlight beam trembling across the room. The warped window in the living room was fogged. A wide smear of condensation spread across the glass, and this time, I watched it form in real time, each breath misting the pain from the inside. I screamed. The sound tore out of me raw and animal, echoing through the house. I stumbled back, tripping over blankets, the flashlight rolling across the floor. And then the knock came. Not from the window this time, from the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks against the locked front door, each one rattling the furniture I'd stacked against it. I couldn't move, couldn't think. My body locked tight, my heart slamming so hard it felt like it would burst. Knock, knock, knock. The wood groaned under the pressure, dust sifting from the frame. I whispered, begged, prayed. Nonsense words spilling from my lips as if language itself might hold it back. Then silence. I didn't dare breathe. But after a long moment, something brushed the glass again. Not a knock, not a scratch. A hand. A long, crooked hand pressed flat against the warped pane from the inside, its outline smeared by condensation. Fingers too long, joints bent wrong, spreading across the glass like pale branches. I sobbed, curling tight on the floor, waiting for it to shatter, for the thing to come fully through. But it didn't. It just stood there, palm against the glass, waiting. Dawn came like a mercy I didn't deserve. When the light seeped weakly through the windows, the condensation was gone. The scratches were still there, the prints still circling outside, but the handprint had faded. I told myself it was over, that maybe the thing only had power at night, that daylight pushed it back. But I knew I was lying, because when I turned toward the hole in the hallway wall, something new had been carved into the plaster just below it. Letters. Uneven, jagged, gouged deep into the wall itself. Let me in. I spent the morning staring at those words. Let me in. Jagged, gouged deep into the plaster, each letter uneven, carved with something sharp. They hadn't been there before. I would have noticed. They were too clear, too deliberate. That meant while I huddled on the floor last night, it had been close. Not just scratching the walls or fogging the glass, close enough to carve a message where I would see it first thing in the daylight. My stomach turned. The words weren't a request. They were a promise. I couldn't bring myself to cover the hole in the hallway wall. The darkness inside gaped like an open mouth, and I knew, if I put my ear close enough, I'd hear it breathing. Instead, I avoided the hallway altogether. I lived in the kitchen that day, clutching the flashlight even though it was broad daylight, jumping at every groan of the house. The air was heavier again. The smell of rust and earth seeped deeper into the walls, clinging to my skin no matter how much I scrubbed. Every surface felt damp, tacky, like the house itself was sweating. When the sun set, I told myself I would stay awake. I'd last until dawn, keep every light on, every door blocked. But exhaustion was a weight too heavy to fight. And when I woke, the lights were off. Every lamp, every bulb, dead. The house was black. I sat bolt upright on the kitchen floor, heart pounding in the suffocating dark. My flashlight flickered weakly in my hand, its beam slicing through dust-thick air. The silence pressed harder than ever, until I heard it, the whistle, but not from outside, not from the walls, from right behind me. I spun, flashlight beam trembling across the kitchen cabinets, the sink, the warped window over the counter. Nothing. Just empty space. But the whistle came again, longer this time, quivering like it was enjoying itself. And then the scratching began. Everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. The sounds surrounded me, closing in, claws dragging slow, deliberate lines, dust sifted from the beams above, plaster flaking from the walls. I screamed, clapping my hands over my ears, rocking in place as the house itself seemed to shiver under the assault. Then, knock, knock, knock. From the window above the sink, I forced myself to shine the flashlight toward it, and my blood turned to ice. The warped glass bulged inward, not cracked, not rattling, bulging, as though something was pressing its face, its body, against it from the other side, straining to push through. The glass stretched, warped, veins of light refracting across the surface. I stumbled back, knocking into the counter, tears spilling hot down my cheeks. The glass quivered, and then it relaxed. The bulge faded, the window snapping back to its warped stillness. But across its surface, new scratches appeared, deep and fresh, curling downward in violent arcs. I didn't move for hours. I just sat there, shaking, the flashlight beam jerking across the floor until the batteries gave out. When daylight finally seeped through, the kitchen looked almost normal again. Almost. Except the scratches remained. And when I glanced toward the hallway, I saw something that made me choke on my breath. The hole in the wall was wider, not by much, but enough. The plaster had cracked and crumbled, the edges jagged, and from inside, faint impressions pressed outward, bulges in the insulation shaped like fingers. It was coming through. I tried the car again. Nothing. The engine wheezed, coughed, and died. I kicked at the tires until my foot throbbed, screaming wordless rage into the silent forest. The sound died quick, swallowed by the trees. And there, at the tree line, it waited. Tall, crooked, wrong. Its limbs hung like broken branches, its head cocked too far to the side. I couldn't see its face, not clearly, but I didn't need to. I felt its stare, heavy as stone. I blinked, and it was gone. The prints in the soil were deeper that day, circling tighter around the house, like a noose. I didn't try to sleep that night. I sat in the living room, clutching the useless flashlight, every candle I could find burning around me. The shadows writhed on the walls, stretching into crooked shapes that made my stomach twist. The house groaned, breathed, whispered. Then came the sound. Not scratching, not whistling. A slow, deliberate dragging against the floorboards upstairs. Footsteps. Something was walking above me. The boards creaked under its weight, each step deliberate, too slow, too heavy. It moved from room to room, pacing, searching. And then, another sound. Not above me anymore, behind me. I turned, heart in my throat. The hallway hole had split wider, plaster crumbling onto the floor. And from inside, a hand pressed through, long, crooked, too many joints, bending at impossible angles. Its pale surface glistened damply, the fingers clawing, curling against the air. I screamed and hurled the flashlight at it. The light clattered uselessly to the floor, but the hand withdrew, sliding back into the darkness of the wall. The scratching started again, faster now, frantic, racing through the beams and panels. And then, a new word appeared, carved deep into the wall right beside the widening hole. Inside. I didn't remember falling asleep, but when I opened my eyes, the candles had guttered out. The room was dark. Too dark. For a moment, I lay frozen, every muscle taut. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was listening. The hole in the hallway wall had widened again. The edges sagged with damp plaster, insulation dangling like wet, stringy flesh. My stomach lurched when I saw what was pushing through this time. Not just a hand, an arm, long, pale, crooked, joints bending wrong. It wriggled like something halfway born, dragging itself free. Clawed fingers scraped the floor, leaving furrows in the wood. I stumbled back, clutching the useless flashlight like it was a weapon. The smell of damp earth and rust filled the house, stronger than ever, as if the thing was dragging the forest inside with it. Then it began to pull. The wall groaned, plaster cracking further, beams shuddering under the strain. The arm jerked, strained, its shoulder wedging through the hole with a sickening pop of splintering wood. I screamed, throwing anything I could reach, a candlestick, a stack of books, even a chair. None of it stopped the writhing limb. The scratching spread again, racing through the walls like fire, frantic, eager. Dust rained from the ceiling as footsteps pounded above, circling faster and faster. And then came the whistle. Louder now, deafening. It rattled the glass in the windows, made my teeth ache. The pitch warped, fractured, splintering into a chorus of voices until it wasn't a whistle anymore. It was laughter. I clamped my hands over my ears, sobbing as the wall split wider. And then I saw it, the face. It pressed against the opening, pale and wet, features smeared like clay dragged too far. Its eyes were hollow, black pits, and yet I felt it stare as if it burned straight through me. Its mouth hung too wide, teeth thin and needle sharp, dripping with something dark. Inside, it whispered. Not carved this time, spoken. The sound wasn't from its mouth, it was inside my head, burrowing behind my eyes. I collapsed, clutching my skull, choking on bile. My body convulsed with terror as it pushed harder, shoulders forcing wider, splinters exploding outward. I ran. I don't remember choosing to, but my body hurled itself down the hallway, feet pounding the warped floorboards. I crashed through the living room, blankets and debris scattering underfoot. The front door loomed, barricaded with furniture. I tore at it, shoving chairs and tables aside, screaming as I clawed at the lock. Behind me, the wall split open with a crack like thunder. The whistle rose again, high-pitched, triumphant. I wrenched the door open and staggered into the night air, sobbing. The forest loomed, black and endless, but anything was better than that house. Anything. I ran barefoot across the dirt, rocks slicing my soles, branches whipping my arms. The cold night air burned my lungs. But the sound followed. The footsteps. Too many of them. Not behind me. Around me. The trees groaned, their trunks bending as shadows flickered in my peripheral vision. I knew it wasn't just one thing anymore. There were more. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. All watching. All following. I broke into a clearing and collapsed, chest heaving. The moon cast a sickly light over the field, illuminating the broken fence line of some long-forgotten farm. I turned, expecting to see the house behind me through the trees. But it wasn't there. The forest was endless, stretching dark in every direction. Panic clawed at my throat. I had run straight. I knew I had. But the house, the only landmark, was gone. The whistle came again, circling the clearing, bouncing between the trees. Then, one by one, eyes opened in the dark. Dozens of them, pale, gleaming, unblinking. They stared from between the branches, from the ground, from the very bark of the trees themselves. Each pair burned into me, pinning me in place. And then, I saw it. The tall, crooked figure stepped into the clearing. Limbs hung too long, bending wrong, head cocked at that same unnatural angle. Its body twitched, convulsing as if it hadn't quite learned how to wear its own skin. It raised one arm, and behind it, every pair of eyes blinked in unison. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My body wouldn't listen. My legs wouldn't move. The figure took a step closer. The ground shuddered beneath its weight. Inside, it whispered again. But this time I understood. It wasn't asking to come into the house. It was demanding to come into me. I bolted, somehow finding strength, stumbling back into the trees. Branches clawed my arms, roots snagged my feet, but I ran blind, desperate, lungs tearing. The forest twisted, paths looping, every direction the same. No matter which way I turned, the clearing reappeared, the crooked figure waiting, closer each time. Finally, my body gave out. I collapsed against a tree, vision swimming, the earth damp beneath my palms. I dared one last look up. The warped window was there, set into the tree, its glass fogged with condensation from the inside, and a hand pressed against it, long and crooked, waiting. I don't remember standing, but suddenly I was moving again, stumbling through the endless woods, branches snapping across my face. My lungs burned, my throat raw from panting. My bare feet were shredded, each step leaving wet prints of blood on the moss. No matter how far I ran, I could still hear it, the whistle. Sometimes distant, sometimes right beside me, always circling, always there. And sometimes I swore I heard my own voice whistling back. The trees thinned, opening into another clearing. I skidded to a halt, chest heaving. My house stood in the center. Not behind me, not through the trees, here. The same sagging roof, the same warped windows, every lamp still dead. It looked smaller somehow, hunched, like it was rotting into the earth. But it was home. I staggered toward it, desperate for walls, for anything to put between me and the eyes still blinking in the tree line. The front door hung open, dark as a mouth, and though every instinct screamed at me not to, I stepped inside. The smell hit me instantly, damp, rot, rust, stronger than ever. My stomach turned, bile rising in my throat. The walls sweated, plaster soft and sagging, wallpaper peeling in long strips. Every surface seemed to pulse faintly, like the house itself was breathing. I wanted to turn and run, but my legs carried me forward into the living room. And there it was, the window, warped, fogged, condensation streaming down its inside. But it wasn't the same as before. It was bigger. The glass stretched nearly floor to ceiling now, swallowing the wall, its surface shivering like liquid. Shadows flickered across it, shapes pressing close on the other side, and in the center, a hand, long, crooked, waiting. Inside. The word rattled my skull, shaking loose every thought. It wasn't just sound, it was compulsion, a demand worming through me like roots. I stumbled closer, unable to stop myself. The glass rippled under my breath, condensation blooming outward. My reflection wavered, bent, smeared. My face stretching wrong. My eyes looked hollow, my mouth too wide. I pressed my palm against the glass, and the other hand pressed back. The surface was cold, too cold. My bones ached instantly, but I couldn't move. Behind the warped reflection, its crooked face leaned closer, eyes bottomless, mouth splitting into a grin that didn't belong on anything human. Inside, it whispered again. And I felt the truth. It wasn't coming in. It was dragging me out. The glass buckled beneath my hand, rippling like water. My palm sank deeper, skin tingling, nerves screaming. I yanked, but my hand stuck fast. The reflection grinned wider. Its hand slid upward, entwining its long fingers with mine. Pain shot through my arm as something pulled hard. My shoulder popped, tendons tearing. I screamed, thrashing, but the more I fought, the deeper my arm sank. The glass wasn't glass anymore. It was a surface, a membrane, thin as skin, stretching around me. I was being pulled through. I kicked, slammed my free hand against the frame, nails splitting as I clawed at the wood. The warped pain swallowed my wrist, my elbow. My scream warped, echoing strangely, as though half of me already existed in another space. The reflection wasn't mine anymore. It stared back at me with hollow black eyes, grinning, lips curling in mockery as my features melted into its own. Inside, it whispered again. And this time my own mouth moved with it, speaking the word without my consent. Tears blurred my vision as my chest pressed against the glass. Cold swallowed me, dragging my heartbeat into slow, strangled thuds. I felt it clawing inside me now, not just pulling my body, my mind. It wanted my memories, my thoughts, myself. It wanted to wear me. With a surge of terror, I did the only thing I could. I bit down hard on my tongue until blood filled my mouth, copper flooding my senses. The pain was sharp, real, mine. I slammed my forehead into the window. The glass shivered, warping, but didn't break. Again and again. Each impact cracked stars across my vision, blood running down my face. But slowly, the membrane loosened, my arm tearing free with a wet pop. I collapsed to the floor, clutching my mangled arm, sobbing. The window rippled angrily, condensation spreading fast, hands pressing against it from the other side. Not one, not two, dozens. They smeared across the glass, long and crooked, scratching words into the surface from within. You are mine. The house shook, plaster raining from the ceiling, furniture rattling across the floor. The whistle rose again, shrill, furious, splintering into laughter and screams. I crawled backward, dragging myself toward the stairs. My body was ruined, but instinct shoved me upward, away, anywhere that wasn't that room. The window bulged, swelling outward, cracks spiderwebbing across its frame. It wasn't finished. It would never be finished. And as I crawled up the stairs, I realized something worse. I wasn't just hearing the whistle anymore. I was humming along. I didn't stop crawling until I reached the top of the stairs. The hallway stretched endlessly, longer than it had ever been. Shadows writhed along the walls, each corner bending like it wanted to swallow me. My arm throbbed. My legs were raw, and every breath tore at my lungs, but I had to move. At the end of the hallway, the bedroom door stood half open. The warped window glowed faintly, the condensation rippling across its surface. The crooked figure had not moved, but I could feel it through the glass, watching, waiting. I gritted my teeth and pushed the door open. The room was empty. The dresser still blocked the window, the books and chair piled against it like a weak defense. But that was not what caught my eye. It was the mirror across the room. I hadn't seen it before. The glass was warped, long and narrow, running from floor to ceiling. Its surface reflected the room, but not quite correctly. My reflection was twisted, elongated, features too sharp, too hollow, a grin curling my lips that I did not make. And then I noticed the eyes. They weren't mine. They were hollow, black, bottomless, and staring right at me. A whisper rose behind me. Not from the window this time, from the mirror. Inside, I stumbled back, but the reflection didn't move. It smiled, then it stepped forward. Or rather, the reflection stepped forward. My own body froze, limbs stiff as ice, eyes locked on the warped glass. And slowly, impossibly, the figure in the mirror stretched its hand toward me. Long, crooked fingers, bending at wrong angles, reached out. My arm lifted without permission, hand meeting hand on the mirror surface. The glass shivered. My skin tingled, a cold crawling up my spine as if something unseen was burrowing beneath it. I tried to pull away, but my body moved slower than my mind. The reflection whispered again, louder, insistent, echoing inside my skull. Inside. And then I understood. It had never been about the window, the forest, the walls, the scratches. It had been inside me all along. the whispers in the night, the sensation of eyes on me, the hallucinations, the mirror. Every moment, every breath had been an invasion. The thing didn't want my house. It wanted my body, my mind, my identity. The crooked hand pressed harder against mine, a pull, sudden and violent. My reflection grinned wider, twisting in ways my body could not, reshaping itself into something I could not comprehend. I screamed, wrenching, spinning, falling backward across the floor. The mirror's surface rippled like liquid, stretching to swallow the room. My reflection leaned out, black eyes boring into mine, and I realized it could reach through. It had reached through. Everything went black. When I came to, I was outside. The forest stretched endlessly, pale moonlight shining weakly. My body was intact mostly. My arm still throbbed, my clothes torn. The house was gone, completely gone. I fell to my knees, gasping. Relief washed over me until I caught my reflection in a puddle. The face staring back was mine. Almost. The eyes were darker than they should be. The grin was too wide, the lines of my face slightly off, crooked. I splashed water on my face, desperate. The reflection didn't change. And then I heard it. A soft whistle. Not outside, not in the forest. From inside me. I dropped to the ground, trembling, realizing the truth I had been running from. The thing wasn't gone. It had followed me. It had watched. It had waited. And now, it was inside. I screamed, but the sound was muffled, swallowed by something deep within. I felt my own thoughts bending, my memories twisting. A whisper in my mind, repeating one word over and over. INSIDE. I could run forever, hide forever. But it didn't matter. It had already won. And as I staggered to my feet, I caught movement in the puddle again. My reflection grinned, and then it stepped forward.
Thank you for watching C&T Horror Stories. Please like and subscribe for more stories.